to Capital Dialogue. I'm Bob Priddy from the Missouri Channel and Missourinet.com. We're glad to have you with us today. Every month we get together with some members of the General Assembly and we talk about what the legislature is doing or has done or will be doing. And we have two members of the state Senate with us today. I'd like you to meet them as we introduce both of them. First of all, on my immediate left is Senator Joseph Keaveny, who is from St. Louis. He's the Vice Chairman of the Senate Committee on Progress and Development. And on my right is Senator Bob Dixon, who's from Springfield, and he is the Vice Chair of the Senate Rules, Joint Rules, Resolutions, and Ethics Committee. Every year, the General Assembly introduces, between the House and the Senate, hundreds of pieces of legislation, well over 1,000. And every year, maybe 10% to 15% of those bills in a good year get passed. That's kind of an understatement, because by the time the legislature sends the bills to the governor, many of the bills have been combined into one, and so we have a number of bills that are there, and it's more than just the number on the bill that goes to the governor. So we're going to talk about some of the issues that did make it through the legislature in 2012, and in the process we'll probably be talking about some of the issues that we'll have left over for next year. We've already talked about the budget. That's the main priority the legislature has, to pass a budget. But there are other pieces of legislation that are laid out as high priorities, and some of them make it and some of them don't. Before we get to those that made it, let's get to one that was part of the Senate leadership, or the Senate leader's favorite bill, and that was right to work. Senator Dixon, that didn't make it. In fact, did it even get much floor time this year?
We had, as I recall, about 2 hours of debate, and it was really more an introduction of the bill. I think it would have been great if we could have had more discussion on that subject, but you're right, it didn't really get a lot of discussion time on the floor.
And that's one of the bills that your party is going to probably talk at length about when they do come up.
That's correct. I represent a very strong union area in St. Louis, and it's a concern for us. We've been having this fight for years and years, since I think 1978, when I was working in the grocery store, was when the right to work first came up. It seems every cycle or so there starts to be a little murmur, and then this past year it actually got to the floor. We discussed it for a little while. Who knows where it's going to come up this year?
And this next time, if it comes up in 2013, the leader of the state Senate, who was pushing it hardest for the last couple of years, will no longer be a senator. He's probably going to be a judge in southeast Missouri somewhere. So he won't be back to push the bill, so we'll even see how far it gets in terms of even coming up. Senator Dixon, you had a number of bills that you were working on during the session, and you had some bills that affected your area quite a bit that got worked on, but let's talk about a couple of your priorities that you got through the General Assembly this year.
Well, Bob, I really had a focus this year. I wanted to see us really get back to basics, down to business, and make government work for the people we're here to serve, the citizens. And in that spirit, and after talking with many constituents, small business folks, who told me, one of our biggest problems is the regulatory uncertainty when it's added on top of the economic situation we're in. And I wanted to see us do a thorough review of state regulation that in many cases and oftentimes stifles job growth, competition, job creation. And this is what the folks told me. And so I put together some legislation, presented it. I didn't realize it was going to become a Senate priority, but I was pleased. It was my top priority to do regulatory reform, which we did pass. The governor signed it. And I think with that rolling 5-year review of really looking in depth at how those regulations are affecting small business is a good thing for us to do. Many of them had not been reviewed or even amended in over 10 years. And it's a starting point. I think we need to continue developing that, so we look at how the costs are calculated, so we make sure government is not impeding job growth. We need to get out of the way many times.
Is this good for workers too, in addition to the people who employ the workers?
Well, I don't think anybody is going to be in favor of overregulation. My question with the bill was the rolling 5-year review. Do we have to keep going through this every 5 years? Usually these regulations they're promulgated as a response to something. So they're addressing an issue that was in the back that has already occurred in the past, or they're trying to address something that they see coming up. I'm okay with the bill. I just question if we have to go through the same exercise every 5 years.
I remember sitting at the Senate press table while you folks were debating this bill, and I was thinking, my goodness, it's not as if you don't have enough to do already. And now you're going to start looking at all the regulations, the state issues. Where are the members of the legislature going to find the time to do this?
At least the bureaucracy is putting a check on itself now instead of on small business and the folks out there that are really the true job creators. I wanted to wake us up to the fact that as a legislature, oftentimes we're trying to revive the economy and tell folks, go create jobs, whether it's an economic development program or whatever it is. And then with the other hand, we're strangling small business oftentimes. Not so much at the state level as the regulatory burden that comes out of the federal government, but we need to make it a point to find out what we're doing to small business. And I understand that this concept of really putting a moratorium on new regulation has even caught on at the federal level with some folks. And I think that's good for us to review from time to time. I really do.
One of the other bills that came up during this legislative session is on charter schools. Now, charter schools exist in St. Louis and Kansas City now, and they've had kind of a mixed success rate. But the bill that was passed by the General Assembly allows some charter schools to come outside those metropolitan areas. Senator Keaveny, let's talk a little bit about that, because you are from one of the cities that has had charter schools.
That's correct.
What do you think of them?
Well, I'm in favor of charter schools, and they're a fairly new concept. There are some good ones, there are some bad ones. The bill that we passed puts additional safeguards into charter schools so you can address some of the bad ones, holds them to the same standard as the public school, which is fair, and expands the options for school districts that may be losing accreditation, allows those students there to have a choice. Do I want to stay with a failing school district, or maybe there'll be a good charter school come in here? Let's give that a try.
Now, I've had people ask me, what is a charter school? Because I live outstate in Jefferson City, near the Capitol, and people hear this word and they don't know what a charter school is. So with your background, explain to the folks what a charter school does. A
charter school is a public school. It's publicly funded, but they don't report to the school district. They have their own board, they have their own oversight. They're managed separately here at DESE. So they can, and quite frankly, in the bill that passed, in St. Louis we have a charter school called Shearwater Academy. It addresses the needs of dropouts and tries to get them back in school, custom tailors the program so that they can graduate, gives them credit sometimes for work experience, and is flexible with their scheduling. So it addresses the needs of the students, and it's publicly funded. So we try to now we're going to hold them to the same standard as the public schools. I think we made a positive step forward.
You're from Springfield. You do not have charter schools in Springfield.
Not at this time, no.
And this is primarily focused at school districts that are in danger of losing accreditation. It's kind of a corrective thing, right?
Yes, and we have great schools in Southwest Missouri. Springfield is the largest fully accredited school district in the state, and we've had a number of discussions. I believe that the education that we afford our kids, we're really setting up the next generation, the folks that are going to be running this place when we're somewhere else. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that, I agree with Senator Keaveny, we need to have, in those situations where we're not meeting our obligation, we need to make sure that folks have choices, and I believe that's a good thing to have anyway. And so we had a good discussion, I believe, with several things. But when I look at a piece of legislation that's impacting the education system, I'm more interested in who the consumer is, that child and what education they're getting, rather than systems. So I think the choices are good.
We have some other issues we're going to discuss when we come back in a minute.
I don't don't miss my card, and I feel safe when I ride this bus. A little over a year ago, I got my car demolished. So I gave up on driving, and I'm their best customer. I go everywhere on that bus 5 days a week. That's just part of my life now. I enjoy the camaraderie. The drivers are really good drivers, and they look after us. I just feel safe when I ride this bus.
To find out how rural public transportation can put more life in your day, just give us a call.
Mayday, mayday. I need help.
Vessel in distress. This is the United States Coast Guard.
There are many thankless jobs out there. This isn't one of them.
We're talking about some of the issues the legislature dealt with in 2012 as we continue our capital dialogue discussion today with two members of the state Senate. Sometimes bills have very simple titles, and they're a little bit deceiving because the title of the bill doesn't really tell you how important it is to a segment of Missouri's community and business community. One of those bills had to do with household goods movers. Now, that might not seem too significant unless you are a household goods mover. So let's talk a little bit about what this means to the people who, next time I buy my house, are probably going to load up my stuff on their truck and take it somewhere. Is that right, Senator?
Yes, let me put it in very basic terms and perhaps make an analogy here. If I was in a particular business, or let's say I wanted to go into a particular business, it wouldn't make sense that I would have to get the approval of everyone else who's already in that business before I could do it. And that's precisely the position that the household goods movers were in. And it was very antiquated legislation from way back, that the 1930s, that was in the process of even being litigated, and brought it to the attention of several members of the legislature. And I decided to bring a bill forward in the Senate this year to remove that, in much the same spirit that I brought forward the regulatory reform, to enhance competition, and it would allow folks to go in and be an entrepreneur and start a business. We're talking about job creation, and yet oftentimes there's not only regulation but legislation that hinders that. And it really comes down to the freedom to earn a living. And so I was very pleased to work with Representative Eric Burleson out of Springfield, who really brought the issue to the forefront, and together got that to the governor's desk. So it's a basic tenet of freedom to be able to earn a living, and that's what has made this country great. And in Missouri, we really pride ourselves on those freedoms and protecting them. And so. And the industry really wanted to see that updated as well, and that problem cleared up. So I'm glad we got it done.
You're from the largest metropolitan area in the state of Missouri.
That's correct.
Has the old law impeded business as you know it, or even hurt people moving?
Actually, until Senator Dixon brought the bill up, I didn't even know we had a problem. And I have some of the largest movers in the metropolitan area. The bill made sense. I think I voted for the bill. It's all about transparency and stimulating the marketplace, things that we ought to be striving to do. But as to if it was a huge problem in the St. Louis metropolitan area, if it was, I sure wasn't aware of it.
So sometimes the movers have to come and talk to the movers and shakers. Get something done. Well, we had a discussion on higher education funding in the legislature this year. The bill didn't make it, but let's run through the higher education funding, because we have a number of state institutions, 2-year institutions, 4-year institutions, a technical university, things like this, and there's some concern about the way all of these things are properly funded. Sketch for us what the concern was that you saw.
Well, there was a bill that was brought up, and there was a series of negotiations with select institutions that were being favored. I know Senator Dixon was very vocal about it, and it just wasn't the correct way to address the inequity that we fund some of these higher education institutions. The bill didn't go far, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about it again.
The bill didn't go far, but the issue remains.
The issue remains, and a number of our colleagues have given me their word that we will have a discussion about fixing the equity problem in higher education going forward. And I hope that is this coming year. It may be the year after, but I've been assured we will have a discussion, and we need to. Because, for example, the university that is in the district that I represent, Missouri State University, has some of the lowest, if not the lowest, funding per pupil across all of higher ed. They stretch their dollars further. You mentioned technical schools, which were not in this particular legislation, but we dealt with that this year in a little bit different way, and we were successful. Ozarks Technical Community College, they received the lowest appropriation per pupil in the country compared to all other technical community colleges. That is, on that technical side, the community colleges actually come up with their own funding, and we were able to essentially move them toward equalizing or improving their equity and their funding. But on the institutions of the state institutions of the 4 years higher education, we have got to come back and look at that and have a broad discussion that looks at a real fix that is not discussed at the 11th hour, but we really have a thoughtful discussion. And that's what we do in the Senate. So I'm sure that that we can get this fixed and do it again sooner rather than later.
Now, he has the second largest state institution in his district. You have the University of Missouri St. Louis, one of the 4 campuses of the university system. Is per pupil funding the best way to go about this?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. I think, as we've seen in the congressional maps, the population has moved southwest. I think our funding formula, and not only for the higher education, even the judiciary, it hasn't kept up with where the population has moved. I think when we get to this discussion, I think we need to get down into the details and say, how are we going to address this? Because the population is going to continue to shift. It's not going to stop. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's not all. I mean, it's not all going to go to Southwest Missouri again.
And it's not just population, because you've got various missions of the schools and various research programs in the schools. So it gets to be pretty complicated pretty quickly, doesn't it?
And that's why we need to have a broader and deeper conversation, and all of those things need to be discussed. And I think we'll do that.
There was a bill this year that on benevolent tax credits that allowed the tax credits to expire. Let's talk a little bit about that, because I know that's something you're very interested in and something that you think needs to be reenacted, is the benevolent tax credits, but separately from the other tax credit program.
I am most passionate about the renewal of the benevolent tax credits. In particular, if I had to just choose one, the expiration of the Children in Crisis tax credit grieved me greatly at the end of session. And the reason it expired was the bill to enact overall tax credit reform stalled, and those two were linked together just in discussion, and the extension of those tax credits, the benevolent tax credits, was included in the tax credit reform bill. First of all, I want to see the benevolent tax credits renewed, and I want to see them decoupled from the overall debate of tax credit reform. I think we need tax credit reform. There has been such a broad spectrum of opinion within the Senate on what we should do with tax credits. Some feel we should do nothing, and the other extreme is some people want to have them eliminated altogether. We do need to have reform, but I don't want to see them thrown out, and I don't want to see them coupled with these benevolence where we're no longer incentivizing, private investment in these excellent organizations that do things for folks that can't do for themselves, and they do a better job of doing those things than state agencies can.
We'll be back with more in a minute.
Has anyone ever said, you're the picture of health? You look healthy and you feel fine. But that may not be the full picture. Colorectal cancer is the #2 cancer killer. It doesn't always cause symptoms, but it can be prevented. Get screened. Make sure you are the picture of health.
To learn about screening in St. Louis, call 314-879-6392. That's 314-879-6392.
All across Missouri, people are making a difference. AmeriCorps, providing resources to meet human needs. Vista, building better communities. Learn and Serve, promoting the service of youth. Senior Corps, sharing wisdom and experience. Make a difference, be a volunteer. This message brought to you by the Missouri Community Service Commission. For more information, visit movolunteers.org or call 877-210-7611.
Some of the issues that came up in the General Assembly came up and were talked about at some length or at little length, but we recognize that they're going to be important next year in 2013. Let's touch on those in the remaining time that we have left in the program today. One of the issues that came up was the Criminal Code Revision Bill. This was a bill that's been worked on for a long time, and it's going to be a huge piece of legislation where the legislature basically rewrites Missouri's criminal laws. It came up, was put there for people to look at. Next year, I suspect, Senator Keaveny, you're going to dig into that a little bit.
I would expect it to, yes. The Missouri Bar has been working on it for a couple of years now. We've got some suggestions. It's a very, very large bill. And there are a lot of statutes there are a lot of items in there that need to be addressed. There are certainly inequities the way that we treat some of the infractions. So it's going to be a long, drawn-out discussion. We're going to literally go page by page.
Criminal laws are passed piecemeal. Every year there's some new crime that people have to work on or some new punishment. Are we out of balance in crime and punishment in our present law, do you think?
Well, anytime we modify one area in the criminal code, we essentially run the risk of upsetting the apple cart with the balance between punishments to certain crimes. In 1959 we had 4 statute books overall, not just the criminal code, and today we have over 20. We have certainly proliferated legislation over the years in between, and that includes the criminal code. And we've also seen a proliferation of what I have heard referred to as designer crimes, and it is clearly time that we take a hard look at how it all relates to each other and to itself. And as Senator Keaveny mentioned, the Missouri Bar has they've summoned a roundtable of folks from all the various sides, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, those that represent various interests that would have concerns, and there's wisdom when you have a multitude of counsel. So I think that they've started in the right place. And we've had some discussions in the legislature. There's an interim committee looking at it. But this is going to be a major, major issue, and not something that we should do quickly, but something we should look at. And I certainly hope that the public will be very engaged in it as we move forward on it.
We've had quite a bit of discussion in the last couple or 3 years about punishments and irregularities of sentences. How much of this discussion on a new criminal code is sentence-driven or penalty-driven, do you think?
Oh, I think that's probably one of the underlying drivers of the review. We spend a lot of money to incarcerate people, and it costs about $20,000 a year to do it. So I think, just from a strictly budgetary standpoint, I think that's the underlying focus of revising the criminal code. Why are we putting so many people in prison, and why are we putting them in there for so long?
In the last 3 minutes or so that we have with the program, let's move on to a court case that has occurred since the legislature adjourned, and that's one that changed the attitude about what was called tort reform in 2005, that sought to limit the amount of damages that someone could win in a medical malpractice case. The Supreme Court now has said that that is not necessarily a valid way to go about dispensing justice in the state of Missouri. Is this all of a sudden going to be a significant issue of discussion for the 2013 session?
Well, I hope it is. I think it's incumbent upon us to have the discussion and revisit not only the intent of the legislature, but the reality of what was done with tort reform. There were caps prior to what we did with the tort reform in 2005. So the court has come in and with this case that was out of Springfield, incidentally, essentially overturned longstanding precedent. And I think it's a good thing for the legislature to revisit that and say, is this really the direction that we want to go? And let's look at all of the implications. Are we going to see an increase in the number of doctors who say, I'm not going to continue to practice in Missouri? That can't be good for my constituents. That can't be good. So I hope we have a discussion. I really do.
Is it a matter simply of scaring off doctors versus making sure somebody who's injured gets justice? Is it that simple, Senator?
Well, you know, in my opinion, we've got to allow for a victim to gain equitable relief for the damage that's done to him. Now, when this discussion comes up, you know, the way that the court worded their opinion, it sounds to me like, I mean, they basically said by imposing these caps, we're denying a trial by jury. So we're going to have to amend the Constitution, and I'm not sure that I want to go there.
Amending the Constitution is a pretty serious business, isn't it? We've got 20 to 30 seconds to talk about how you going about doing that without stepping on other people's toes.
Well, and in general, I will say that, you know, I talked about the proliferation of statutes. Mm-hmm. We've started to turn the Constitution. We have amended the Constitution oftentimes and made that book rather thick compared to previous years. So I think we need to use prudence and caution when we do that. I would agree with my colleague. But it is certainly worth the discussion and looking at what the implications are and what the consequences could be if we don't do anything.
Thank you. So we look ahead as well as behind on this edition of Capitol Dialogue. Thanks for being with us.